first. Tomorrow, as I said, is Australia Day, and like most people around this magnificent, though occasionally malfunctioning continent, I'll be celebrating it. I'll be celebrating the country that took a few boatloads of half-starved British misfits and somehow turned them into the safest, freest, wealthiest society in human history. A nation so stable that even people who loathe it feel perfectly safe living here while denouncing it. Which brings us to Western Sydney councillor Ahmed Oaf. According to Councillor Oaf, if you celebrate Australia Day, you're celebrating a Holocaust. Now, that's not a metaphor, that's not rhetorical flourish, that's an actual accusation of genocide, casually lobbed like a hand grenade into the middle of Social Cohesion Week. In one sentence, this councillor manages to insult Jews who suffered an actual Holocaust and Australians whose ancestors, well, they never committed any such thing. It takes a special kind of moral clumsiness to trivialise the worst crime in human history while accusing your neighbours of being latent mass murderers. But it gets worse. Councillor Oaf goes on to suggest that anyone who celebrates Australia Day should be treated with deep suspicion. Why? Well, he says, if you're willing to celebrate a Holocaust, who's to say you wouldn't be happy to run one yourself if the opportunity arose? That's right, apparently the backyard barbecue is just phase one. Phase two is genocide. Have a listen to this masterpiece of community building.
If you are okay with celebrating the beginning of a genocide, maybe one day when you have the chance, you might start another genocide.
Ah, yes, history shows nothing escalates into mass extermination quite like a sausage sizzle and a few kids with sparklers. At a time when Australia desperately needs calm heads, shared values and a tiny bit of gratitude, it beggars belief that an elected councillor would pump out this kind of deliberately incendiary nonsense. I'll show you more of his comments in just a moment, but first, let's acknowledge the breathtaking irony at work here. Councillor Ahmed Oaf arrived in this country in 2010 as an immigrant from Egypt. Australia gave him and his family the opportunity to build a life of safety, prosperity, free speech, political participation, religious freedom, the whole Western bundle. We even gave him the privilege of standing for office and being elected to local government. Now, on that point, as a member of local government, he's paid handsome wages by ratepayers and he's meant to organise garbage removal and the maintenance of local parks. But instead, he uses the privileges we've afforded him to post videos like this one online. This was posted yesterday.
The Australian Holocaust began on 26th of January 1788. At that time, Australia was home to around 1 million Aboriginal people. These were stable societies that lived for tens of thousands of years. What followed was catastrophic massacres, genocide, forced removals, ethnic cleansing, introduced disease, the destruction of land, food systems, families and culture.
If all of that were true, and of course it isn't, there was no genocide and certainly no Holocaust, but if it were true, well, there's an obvious question, isn't there? Why did you move your family here? If Australia's nothing more than a vast open-air crime scene soaked in permanent moral contamination, why choose it as your destination of choice, councillor? Why raise your children here? Why seek public office here? And why accept a taxpayer-funded salary here? Unless, of course, you don't actually believe your own rhetoric, you just find it politically useful. Councillor Ahmed Oaf is, shall we say, an interesting character. He's been accused of meeting with members of Hamas, which is charming, yet somehow in his own telling, he's not the problem. No, the real threat to Australia is not radical ideology, imported grievance politics or moral arson. The real danger is ordinary Australians who like their country. Listen to this.
I have my doubts and I have my concerns about them. Living amongst them is something that doesn't bring any peace or comfort to me, because if you are okay with celebrating the beginning of a genocide, maybe one day when you have the chance, you might start another genocide.
So if you enjoy Australia Day, you're basically a genocidal maniac in waiting, which raises a practical question. If Councillor Ahmed feels so unsafe living among Australians who celebrate their own nation, he could always leave. Egypt is lovely this time of year. But of course, he won't, will he? Because in Egypt, you don't get paid by taxpayers to insult your host nation, flirt with extremist rhetoric, and lecture the public about moral purity from the comfort of a Western democracy. Which brings us to Councillor Ahmed Oaf's final flourish of absurdity.
If you truly care about the victims of Bondi, if the mass killings of Palestinians over the past 2 years has moved you, and if the suffering of the Ukrainian people has shaken you, then stand with us this Monday. This is not a day to celebrate. It's a day to acknowledge truth, to mourn injustice and demand change. Join us on the streets of Sydney and across Australia as we push for an Australia Day that represents everyone. We will keep pushing until truth is recognised, until justice is honoured.
This is what we get from an immigrant. Here's another thing you should know about Councillor Ahmed Oaf. He was endorsed to run at the last federal election by the Muslim votes mob. You'd imagine they might want to improve their candidate screening. Then again, maybe their screening worked exactly as it was designed. He stood in Jason Clare's seat of Blaxland and won 20% of the vote. 1 voter in 5 in that Western Sydney seat believes this bloke is needed in the federal parliament. And that tells you something important about the direction certain activist blocs would like this country to travel. They want us to travel away from liberal democracy and towards imported tribal politics where loyalty is demanded, dissent is pathologised, and national identity itself is treated as a moral disease. That's the real argument beneath the shouting about January 26. Anyone who thinks this is an argument about a date hasn't been paying attention. It's not about where in the calendar we celebrate Australia Day. It's about whether or not Australia remains a confident nation or becomes merely a neutral economic zone where everyone is free to take, complain and reshape it into something completely unrecognisable. Tomorrow, like most of you, I'll be celebrating Australia Day. Not because Australia is perfect, no country is, but because Australia is a decent, free, generous, inventive and remarkably self-correcting country. And because, unlike some of its critics, I actually love the place that gave me everything I have.